Hello, everyone, and welcome to your 2023 year ahead horoscope for Virgo rising. If you're a Virgo sun, of course, you can watch this, but it might make a little bit more sense if you watch it from your rising sign. In this video, I'm going to be first covering just the major transits of this year. And then after that, I'm going to be going into advice for the Virgo risings, like things to keep in mind, mindsets to kind of have to make sure you have a successful year. And then after that, we're going to be going month by month into 2023. So with that being said, make sure you give this video a like so you can come back to it throughout the year and check on the predictions. As well, leave me a comment below. Let me know what month you're looking forward to. Let me know what months you're not looking forward to. And let me know if you have any plans or goals this year that align up with your astrology. I'm really curious to see about that. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is also a two-part video series. I did a video covering the major transits of 2023, and I go really in depth into the transits. And so make sure you watch that video so when you come back here, it's going to make a little bit more sense applying it to your chart. But the biggest month this year is March. We have a lot of things going on in March, or at least I should say big things happening in March. The first highlight that we really have this year is Saturn ingressing into Pisces. This is actually going to be a really big deal for you guys, specifically as Virgo risings. That's happening on March 7th. We have Pluto going into Aquarius. This is a 20-year-long transit, and I did a whole podcast about this over on my podcast called The Delineation. Make sure you check it out. It's some deep stuff, but this is a 20-year-long change, a 20-year-long transformation that we're going to be going into. Then later on in the spring, we have Jupiter ingressing into Taurus. This is awesome for you guys. I really like Jupiter going into Taurus. And then later on, we're going to be having the North Node go into Aries and the South Node going into Libra later on in the summer. This is going to be really weird for you. I think this is going to be actually a pretty challenging aspect for you guys. But then we get the Venus retrograde in Leo this summer. That's really the biggest highlight of this year. Venus is going to be in Leo for 5 months. And it's unfortunate because I really like the transit in and of itself, but it's in a difficult placement for you guys this year. So we'll be talking about that as we go on. But these are the major pieces of advice I want to give for the Virgo risings. One, pay off your debt and use the access to other people's resources. A lot of this year is going to be focused on, I don't want to say losing money, but like there's going to be some debt that you have to pay off. There's going to be this really intense pull to be involved with other people's resources, whether that's, borrowing money, paying off money. And we'll be getting into that. Learn, travel, get educated, get into spirituality. There's a big increase into your spiritual life this year, whether that's through traveling or learning or anything, or even publishing too. So I think that's going to be a really fun place for you guys. Save money. You have a lot of bills coming up this year. So this is a really good year to just save money. Watch some Dave Ramsey or something like that and get a grip. And also too, and this is more advice for the Venus retrograde, get some confidence and stop beating yourself up. I think a lot of this year is going to be, or at least this summer is going to be really getting out of your shell and kind of, not necessarily being so stuck in your head, especially when it comes to like, just being witnessed, being seen, being glorified. Virgo risings kind of have like, they really are hard on themselves. So let's go ahead and start talking about it. So the main things that we really start with January is actually going to be Mars stationing direct and Mercury stationing direct as well. So before we go into that, because this really shifts like the year, I do want to bring up one thing, and that is by the time we start New Year. So in this recording, to just look at this left corner here, if I don't specifically mention the dates, but Jupiter is going back into Aries pretty much right before the New Year starts. So Jupiter has already dipped into Aries. It was in Aries from May, June, July, August, September, October, pretty much. Then it went back into Pisces and went back into your 7th house of relationships. Jupiter is going to go back into Aries and fully transit your 8th house. So whatever was going on around last spring and summer regarding shared resources, other people's money, death in the family, having other people having access to your resources. This is also going to involve relationships. There's something about that you're going to come back to starting the year. And now Jupiter in Aries is a very ambitious and excited energy. But if you're planning on, a new year, new you right out the first, I think there might be some problems with that. And that's because Mars doesn't station direct until January 12th. So Mars has been retrograde in your 10th house of career, legacy, reputation for a couple months now. Mars first ingressed into Gemini, August, and then it was in there from September, October, then it stationed retrograde, November, December, and it doesn't station direct until January. Mars is fights and conflicts and energy, drive, action. It's been in your 10th house of career. You've probably been taking on 2 jobs, going left, going right. And then there was a lot of backtracking over the winter where, maybe those 2 situations didn't work out. Maybe you couldn't keep your focus or something like that. Once Mars stations direct, it's going to be much easier to get a grip on your career situation and what exactly you're tackling. Maybe if you were distracted or going, being pulled in two different directions, this is when it's much more manageable. But then right after that, Mercury stations direct on the 18th. Now, this is really important because, again, Mercury goes retrograde, I believe, like right before the new year. So Mercury will be in shadow for the last couple weeks of December, and then it will station retrograde right before the new year, and then it'll be retrograde for the first part of it. Mercury retrograde symbolizes like a rethinking, a replanning, a re-strategizing. It's in the sign of Capricorn, so like plans and, stability, tradition. And this has been in your 5th house of sex, passion, creativity, arts, children, recreation. So there might have been a rethinking or re-strategizing around, again, like pleasure, recreation, self-expression. Maybe you had a miscommunication with one of your children. That all gets settled by the 18th. And so I am arguing that I don't really think the new year energy is really going to be kicking off until, 1, when Mars goes retrograde here. Mars goes direct here. But 2, once Mercury goes direct. Because once Mercury goes direct, Mercury's your ruling planet. So a lot of what Mercury's doing is really important to you guys. But once Mercury goes direct, it's like, all right, we kind of have a plan. We have an outline. We know where we're going. So then after that, as we get into February, the only thing that we have going on in February is Mercury leaves shadow. Again, this is in the 5th house, sex, recreation, fun, love, romance. Once Mercury leaves shadow, this is when you get to clear all of this up. So it's like, this all begins halfway through December. And then from the end of December all the way through January, there's this kind of, going backwards, replanning, re-strategizing. But then that all gets cleared up by the time we get to the 7th. And that's really it for February. What I really see February being is a calm before the storm. As I've mentioned a lot of times on my channel, March is the biggest month of this year. And there is this kind of, again, February is really, really boring comparative to March, but let's go ahead and start talking about March. Hold on, let me do this real quick. So a couple big events. The first one is going to be Venus conjoining Jupiter in Aries. So this is in your 8th house of other people's money, death, debt, taxes, occult, secrets. And this is a really good transit. It's not necessarily the best transit for you guys. I think you will be happy with the outcome. However, it's going to be a little brutal. And let me explain. So Venus in your guys' chart rules your 2nd house of money, right? And it also rules your 9th house of higher education, traveling, school, publishing, spirituality, as well as like social media. The planet that rules your money is in detriment in Aries. So there's a sense of like, Venus is not doing well in Aries. Venus wants, things to come to her. Venus in Aries has to like kind of take things. And Venus is going to be conjoining Jupiter here in your 8th house. The 8th house rules other people's money. So your money is literally involved with other people's money. It's conjoining Jupiter here. So there's some type of gift or abundance or inheritance or something like that. And it's on Chiron. Chiron is this wounded healer. If I could make a quick prediction, I think this is like paying off some debt. Maybe getting some money coming in somehow and paying off some debt. You might be broke for a minute, but I think you'll feel relieved. Like this is a really good transit in the 8th house. Or maybe some debt gets forgiven, or maybe you get a gift from somebody so you can pay off some debt. This is really the time to pay off some debt. There is going to be more transits happening this year that will be affecting the area of your life that rules your money and debt and shared resources. But this is like a good opportunity to clear things up in there. Or maybe, I don't want to say take out a loan, but this would probably be a more beneficial time for that, to be honest with you guys. Maybe not when Mercury's in Pisces, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. But right after that, a few days later on the 7th, Saturn enters Pisces. This is going into your 7th house of relationships, others. And I put open enemies because the 7th house is really anybody. It could be your doctor, your lawyer, your dentist, or the guy, yelling at you down the street. This is a big shift for you guys because Saturn has been in your 6th house of work, labor, routines, health, habits for the past 2.5 years. So there's been this big constriction or this responsibility taken in your work and your career, especially like employment and just day-to-day activities. But now Saturn, which rules discipline, maturity, time, commitments, duties, obligations, is going into your 7th house of relationships, other people. So a lot of you, it's a time to get really serious about relationships. It's time to commit. For other group of people, for the night chart people, this is going to feel like a restriction in relationships. It's going to be, I think, difficult to navigate relationships in the sense of trying to figure out where your boundaries are, trying to figure out who are the people that you let in, who are the people that you don't let in. But this is also just a process of change with relationships. And this is what's going to be going on for the next 2.5, 3 years. So this is a long-term transit that is really shifting towards your 7th house of relationships. Then a couple weeks later, on the 22nd, Pluto enters Aquarius. Now, this is, again, a 20-year-long transit. It's not like something I can just totally encompass in, 5 seconds here. But Pluto's going into your 6th house of work, labor, routine, health, habits, pets specifically, coworkers, and employees. And Pluto rules a few things. It rules power, it rules corruption, it rules fear, it rules transformation. And I think the hard part about this is, again, this is a 20-year-long transit, so you're not just going to see, again, when Pluto goes into Aquarius, I think on the world stage, you'll see a really big difference. But this is a 20-year-long thing. And I think there's going to be this sense of fear or restriction coming from work or health or habits. And Pluto is asking you to kind of like take that fear and use it as power. It's asking you to transform the way that you operate in your day-to-day life and your with your health, with your habits. So this is a real, and Pluto also rules like governments and institutions and things like that, governments and corporations. So, if you work in a specific field, you might see that come up a little bit more. But really, it's just the time to really, like, over these next 20 years, your health, your habits, your work routine, Pluto and Aquarius kind of going, either getting left out or, really plugging into the system. Again, I do a podcast about it so you can get a little bit more detail. But then right after that, a few days later, Mars enters Cancer. This is honestly probably better for you guys, to be honest with you. I'd rather have Mars in fall and Cancer in your 11th house than Mars, in your 10th house for so long. But Mars is going into your 11th house of community, networks, friends. And sometimes it does rule your career, kind of depending on your chart. But this is a big shift simply because for the past 8 months, Mars has been in your 10th house of career. And so there's been all of these changes in your work and your career and all that stuff. Once Mars goes into Cancer, Mars rules fights, conflicts, separation, cutting. It's going into your 11th house of friends, networks, communities. And I think with Mars in Cancer, it's a lot about being protective and nurturing, not necessarily being on the offense. And Mars is going to be trining Saturn in your 7th house. I think this is just going to be a time to really be like close to the people that you love, connecting more with relationships, really solidifying, friendships and individual relationships in your life. Sure, you might have some conflicts with friends, but I think at the end of the day, this is actually really constructive. But anyway, as we move forward, we get to April, and April is where things really start ramping up for the summer. First, we have the Jupiter Cazimi in Aries. This is happening on the 11th. Again, this is in your 8th house, other people's money, death, taxes, occult, secrets. The 8th house is weird. It's a blinding house. It's a hidden house. So you can't always, you don't always see how much money other people have, right? And so the 8th house is like things that you can't see. So the big thing with this Jupiter Cazimi essentially is that this is kind of restarting and refreshing the narrative around Jupiter in your 8th house. Jupiter, when a planet goes Cazimi, that planet's energy is kind of getting refreshed or reborn again. This is your 7th house ruler. Jupiter rules your 7th house of relationships, and it rules your 4th house of home and living situation. And this is also the sun. The sun rules your 12th house of hidden enemies, isolation, alienation. And it's conjoining, again, Jupiter in your 8th house. So this might be like, I wouldn't be surprised if you guys had some type of death in the family or some type of inheritance come in or some type of, because that's what Jupiter does, right? Jupiter brings like gifts, and it's in the 8th house of inheritance, and it rules your 4th house of home and family. So I would look around for that area, but this is maybe where you find a new ambition or a new story kind of begins in that area for you. Right after that, we have our solar eclipse in Aries. So this is important because we just had this Jupiter Cazimi, right? So there's this whole refresh and restart in your 8th house. But then we have our first solar eclipse in the sign of Aries. This is happening on the 19th. And what's important about this is at this point, the North Node is still in Taurus. The nodes haven't necessarily shifted signs yet. And so this is giving us a preview into what the next year and a half of eclipses have. Eclipses are like emergency events. They're kind of like portals or gateways, whatever you want to call them. But they really take your attention away from whatever you're doing and focus on one area. And this is in your 8th house of death, other people's money, shared resources. And so again, the nodes haven't shifted here yet, and I think that's important. But this is going to be starting a story around this area for you guys. And this is a solar eclipse, right? This is the moon blocking out the light of the sun. So there's going to be something that really takes your attention away in this area, whether that's, a death, whether that's some type of shared resource, whether that's like a change in the way that you understand yourself and your world. The eighth house is a really, funky place when it comes to like the spiritual stuff. So that means we start eclipse season. We're now in the middle of eclipses. And just 2 days later, on the 21st, this is when we have Mercury stationing retrograde in Taurus. Now, this is in your ninth house of spirituality, religion, far distance travel, higher education, publishing, social media. Mercury retrogrades often, symbolize delays, rethinking, re-strategizing, going over things again. This is in the sign of Taurus, so we're talking about value, we're talking about stability, we're talking about, it's a fixed sign, so, trying to keep things the same. Mercury is stationing on Uranus, so this might be a random event that occurs or some type of destabilizing event that might occur in this area. And that's this, for traveling, I may not necessarily recommend traveling at this time. Or if you go traveling, it's going to be kind of a little chaotic. But what's important about this Mercury retrograde is Mercury is going to be going over this first part of Taurus. And here in just a second, we're going to be talking about how Jupiter ingresses into Taurus. So Jupiter is going to be going in your ninth house. I'll talk about that in a second. But this Mercury retrograde is like preparing for that, like getting your house ready. So there's going to be this rethink or this re-looking at your beliefs, spirituality, astrology, far distance travel, higher education, all of that area. So that then brings us into May. And in May, mind you, we're still in the middle of eclipse season. We close out eclipse season with the last lunar eclipse in Scorpio on Cinco de Mayo. So the nodes have been in Taurus and Scorpio since about January of 2022. Around April and May, we had some eclipses in your ninth house of spirituality and in your third house of communication, technology, short distance travel. It also rules siblings. So there might have been an extreme event that might have occurred in this area where you had to let go of things, or there was some hurt or some pain or some resentment that came up. This lunar eclipse in Scorpio is the last lunar eclipse in Scorpio that we'll have, at least for another 9 years. And what I like about this eclipse is the analogy that I've been using is like, if you've ever moved a house before, there's the day where you move all of the big furniture and all of the big boxes. And then there's the day you come up and you do the last cleaning of everything. This is what this is. You've already done all of the heavy weight, from November of 2022 and even in May of 2022. But now we're coming back to it of like, what else do we have to let go of? What else do we have to change? Notice that there's a lot of things going on in your ninth house of spirituality, astrology, social media, publishing. And there's all of this focus in this area. And the ninth house rules higher education. And something I like to talk about is the third house is how you apply that. The third house is like, okay, if this is what you know and this is what you believe, how do you actually integrate that into your day-to-day life? And so the south node going through your third house is really kind of letting go of past ways of doing things because you're in this growth, you're in this learning mindset. And so this is kind of that last hurrah of change some of your, I don't want to just say habits, but change the way that you're doing things. Like let go of, ways of doing things that you're holding on to and kind of focus more on learning and growing. Because right after that, we close out eclipse season and then Jupiter enters Taurus. This is happening on May 16th. This is awesome for you guys. This is way better than everything in your eighth house because Jupiter is going into your ninth house. Again, spirituality, religion, far travel, you get the idea. Jupiter's all about expanding. Jupiter's all about giving gifts. Jupiter's all about abundance. And it's in the sign of the bull. It's in the sign of, stability and value and feeling safe and satiated. So as Jupiter goes into your ninth house, this could be traveling. This could be going back to school. This could be, this could be getting into astrology, getting into spirituality. There's this huge expansion in this area for you guys. And it's Jupiter, right? It's about your beliefs. It's about having faith. It's about having hope. And Mercury is also freshly direct at this point. So it's like all of a sudden, once we get to the middle of May, this whole area is like a whole new world for you. You're taking on a lot. You're expanding a lot. And it looks really, really good. We'll talk more about it in just a minute. Then at the end of May, this is when we have Mars entering Leo. So this typically isn't the biggest deal in the world, but we are going to be having a Venus retrograde in Leo. And this Mars ingress really kind of kicks it off. Mars is going into your 12th house. Isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts and feelings, and hidden enemies specifically. So Mars going into your 12th house is going to feel a little annoying. The 12th house, again, is like your subconscious and fears and phobias, and Mars is like fights and conflicts, and it's in Leo. So you might be like doing things in a bravado sense, but almost kind of self-sabotaging too. Mars in Leo is like doing things out of, to be triumphant. Mars in Leo is doing things for the glory, and it's in your 12th house of self-sabotage. Mars is going to be going opposite Pluto here, so there's going to be some type of like going against the grain of certain structures, or really challenging, your fear or power with your health, your habits, your day-to-day activities. This might bring up some health stuff too, but this is really kind of kicking off the Venus retrograde stuff, because Mars is going to go through Leo in your 12th house, and it's going to cause all these issues. And so Leo ruling the 12th house, this is why I said this earlier. It's like Leo rules like, pride and glory, and it's in your 12th house of self-sabotage and like repressed feelings. So this could be a challenging topic for you guys as far as like being witnessed, being seen, being, honored. And Mars in Leo there might be moments where you experience those things and you have problems with them of some sort. And we'll be talking more about it as the months go on. So then we get to June, and the first major transit we have in June is Jupiter conjoining Rahu. Again, this is in Taurus. This is on June 1st. And then Rahu is better known as the North Node. Again, this is in your 9th house, so talking about all the same topics. But the North Node, again, the nodes symbolize where eclipses are going to be. But the North Node is like this urge, this pull, this desire to go in a specific direction, this need to go in this direction, this hunger that can't be satisfied. And when Jupiter conjoins it, Jupiter is like about excess and really overdoing things, right? So there's going to be this like some of you might just be traveling the whole world. Some of you just might be, going to a different country and being like, man, I'm just going to stay here for a little while. Some of you could be going to school. Some of you can be learning more about astrology. There's going to be just this vortex that kind of opens up in this area for you guys. And by this point too, Mercury has now left shadow. So there's this, again, you did all of this clearing up and rethinking, and now you're kind of in a whole new world in this area. So this looks really good. The only thing I don't like about it is like, it's going to be easy to take on too much or to overdo things or to overconsume stuff. So, just be careful on how much you're going into it and, what is enough, I guess. But this is also like a good time to like lean into it. Do a lot, but again, like have your party, but don't die. So then right after that, Saturn stations retrograde in Pisces. This is about 2 weeks later on the 16th of June. And this is again in your 7th house, relationships, others, open enemies, people that are visibly like, or that you are aware of that don't like you. So what's interesting about this is Jupiter rules your 7th house of relationships, and it is, flying through Taurus, and it's going to be sextiling Saturn. So there's a lot of supportive energy with relationships. I really like relationships for you guys this year. Yes, Saturn's in your 7th house, but at least this time around, there is some stability. There's some really good stuff going on. But when Saturn stations retrograde, this is the moment where the analogy I've been using is like, when Saturn goes forward into a new sign, this is like taking on new responsibility, maturity. The analogy I use is like getting a management position. But then when Saturn goes retrograde, this is kind of like dealing with the consequences of that, right? If you're just a regular employee, you might look at a management position of like, oh, it must be nice to be the authority and in control. But then there's a moment where, you become a manager or you become an authority of some sort, and you realize that your problems and your disciplines are different. And this is that Saturn retrograde moment. Saturn retrograde is like, oh, this is where I need to mature. This is where I need to grow up. Oh, these responsibilities are actually a little bit hard. And you're going to be going over everything that was really introduced to you over the next few months. So this is when relationships get really serious. But it's Jupiter sextiling Saturn. Like, it's great, in my opinion. It's very supportive. It's just asking you to take this area of your life more seriously. But as you've probably noticed, Venus is in Leo at this point, and our next highlight is Venus enters shadow 3 days later. Again, this is in your 12th house, isolation, self-sabotage, repressed thoughts and feelings. So this is what's really interesting is, and you guys specifically, the Virgo risings, are just getting a really weird mixture of planets and energies this year. But as Venus enters shadow, she's going to hit 12 degrees. What's important about this is whatever happens on this day here on June 19th, you're going to be coming back to here later on around September, October. Venus is, again, Venus in Leo is like, I want to be seen, I want to be witnessed, I want to be in the spotlight, I want the attention. But it's in your 12th house of, like, repressed, unacknowledged parts of yourself, things that you put on the back burner. Venus rules your 9th house of spirituality, and it's in the 12th. So I feel like you're going to be really, like, honestly, a lot of self-worth shit's going to come up. And, all of these things are expanding in your 9th house of beliefs. And I think you're going to be challenged by that. Like, you're going to have to overcome some insecurities and some, the bullshit story that you tell yourself. But there's something about this where Venus in Leo is receiving attention, right? But this is evening star Venus. Evening star Venus is like receiving a bunch of attention versus morning star Venus, which we'll talk about, is like going and getting attention. And so I think you might realize there's some attention, or there's something that you're seeing about yourself, or that others are seeing about you, that you don't like here. You're not enjoying maybe the audience or why people are watching you. Venus also rules your 2nd house of money and finances, and that's going into, it's going to be retrograde in your 12th house. So there's going to be some, maybe, I don't want to say spending money that's problematic, but at least your beliefs around money are going to be changing. That's the least I could say here. So then we get to July. July, we have Mars entering Virgo. This is going to be, of course, in your 1st house of the self, your body, your image, your personality. And later on, we're going to be having a Mercury retrograde in Virgo. And just like Mars going into Leo is going to cause all of these issues that bring up the Venus retrograde, Mars going into Virgo is going to cause all these issues that bring up the Mercury retrograde. And so again, Mars is all about fights, conflicts, irritation, frustration. And as it goes into your 1st house of the self, the body, your image, your personality, I think you're going to be a little anal for a minute. Mars is in Virgo, where it has to be very pinpoint, exact, sterile. And Mars is in Virgo, where you're going to be like wanting to take very hyper-specific actions. My only worry is like having a lot of anxiety, being too nitpicky about stuff. And maybe that's good for certain things, but I feel like while Venus is in your 12th house, Mercury is in your 12th house, Mars in your 1st, I just feel like you're going to feel a little down on yourself. So I think the way out of this is just really like doing your best to take care of yourself, having like, a plan, a schedule, but not being overly critical of yourself. I think it'll be really easy to do that. But then about 2 weeks later, after that, in the middle of July, the North Node and the South Node enter Aries and Libra. Again, this is where the eclipses are, and this is when the eclipse energy really shifts into a whole new part of your life. The North Node is going into your 8th house of other people's money, death, debt, taxes, occult secrets. And the South Node, which represents this draining, purging energy, is entering your 3rd house. My bad, not your 3rd house. I had to write 12 of these, so some of these are wrong. It's entering your 2nd house, 2nd house of money, essentially. So there's going to be this big pull towards 8th house stuff of, other people's money, other people's resources, and there's going to be this drain with your resources. And it doesn't sound like anything new for all the Virgo risings, I know, but it will be a different energy. This is happening on July 18th. And so there's going to be the sense of South Node in Libra in your 2nd house. Like there's going to be an unbalancing in your 2nd house of money, where you might have things balanced and fair. You're going to have things a little bit unbalanced in order to maybe pay off some debt or help other people out. Like the 8th house is like, you being involved in other people's business. And so that might be helping other people out, being a caretaker of some sort. But that shift of a pull towards something and a drain towards something happens on July 18th. And what's interesting about the South Node entering Libra is the ruler of Libra, Venus, goes retrograde just a few days later. This is, again, 12th house stuff, right? And so Venus going retrograde is a value shift. Venus is all about value and pleasure and fun, and she rules your 9th house of beliefs and your 2nd house of money, and she's going retrograde in your 12th house of like hidden, like isolation, alienation, your subconscious. And so this seems like a really radical change to, I think, your beliefs around yourself and even your beliefs around money. Venus retrograde in Leo is like, again, maybe you've been receiving this attention or you've been seeing something about stuff that you don't necessarily like. This is when you flip the narrative. And this is going to be a couple week process that you go through. So it's not going to necessarily be overnight, but this is when you see that change really come into play. Like Venus retrograde in your 12th, realizing that situation, realizing, oh, maybe this is where I can improve. Oh, maybe this is where I can change my definitions. Because this is like your beliefs being challenged in a way that's like kind of forces you to recognize it. Plus the sun enters Leo at this point. So there's this really big focus on things that you don't necessarily get an opportunity to see all the time. Oops, there we go. So then we get to August. By the time we get to August, we have a Venus cazimi in Leo. This is the halfway point. This is like 3 weeks later. And the halfway point of a Venus retrograde is seeing that shift occur, right? There's, the first week or two when you like really make changes into your life, but then this is the moment where you start seeing results of those changes and you realize that you have undergone a change. That is happening on August 13th. This is all going to be in your 12th house too. So this is also going to be really big about dreams and things like that. But this is really where you shift your attitude again around money, finances, resources, and around higher education, astrology, spirituality, and all of that stuff. This is where, those, I don't want to even say those realizations, but this is all Leo stuff. I think you guys need to gain more confidence. I think you guys need to be more like, I don't want to say real, but just like Leo ruling the 12th house is so like, being glorified or being seen as like scary stuff. And I think you kind of have to get over that. This is a really big time to change your self-worth beliefs or something like that. Then Mercury goes retrograde August 24th, about a week and a half later. And Mercury rules your first house. It's your ruling planet, right? So it rules the self, the body, and the image, and it's going retrograde in your first house. So this is going to be like a whole new looking at yourself in a completely different lens. Notice that Mars is right here too. So Mars has been, maybe causing some irritation, some struggles, and Mercury is going to give you an opportunity to look at this area of your life in a completely different sense. How do you understand yourself? How do you express yourself? What is your understanding of who you are? Because Mercury is going to be some type of miscommunication. You might say something wrong. It's Mercury in your first house. Like you might, say something wrong, say something dumb, have to go back on your words or something like that. But this is really just a different way of looking at yourself and looking at your life, and also body stuff. This has a lot to do with health too. So then right after that, Mars enters Libra. And the big thing here is I don't typically talk about Mars ingresses that much, but this Mars ingress is also setting the stage up for all of the other transits we have going into the fall. Mars is going into your second house of money, finances, possessions. And as Mars goes in there, Mars burns, Mars separates, and it's going into your second house of cash. Plan to spend money that you may not necessarily have. This is why I said in the beginning, start saving money when you can. Mars going into your second house, there's going to be problems, heating up, burning in your second house of money, and it's in detriment in Libra, right? Mars rules your 8th house of shared resources, and it's going to be in your second house of money. So maybe this is like using money that's not yours, using other people's resources that aren't necessarily yours. And it's in Libra. There's this sense of like not being balanced, or there's this sense of kind of doing things for other people, even if it's not in your interests. Mars in Libra is like hard to confront. Mars in Libra is very back and forth with things, very indecisive. So this might feel very like, trying to pinch your pennies and get everything balanced. And that might be something hard to do, in my opinion, because this is also while Venus is retrograde. But then we get to September and Venus stations direct in Leo. Now this is happening on September 4th. But what's also interesting about September 4th is Jupiter stations retrograde. Now, Jupiter is in the sign of Venus, and Jupiter will station retrograde the same day Venus, the ruler of Jupiter at this moment, stations direct. So there's a really big switch going on here. This is, in my opinion, like the most interesting day. Because as Venus stations direct, this is now morning star Venus. There is this ambition, and there is this like, all right, this is how I see things, and this is what I'm going for. And it's very Venus and Leo. It's like identifying and recognizing what your wants are. And how you want to be witnessed and seen. And Venus going morning star is like looking at this whole area of beliefs and self-sabotage differently. But then Jupiter goes retrograde, where there's this sense of now Jupiter has been giving you all of this abundance and opportunity and growth in your 9th house of spirituality, higher education, traveling. When Jupiter goes retrograde, this is where that faith and that belief really kind of goes away. And this is where you have to kind of have belief and faith mustered up in yourself. What are you grateful for? Are you grateful for things that when they go your way, or are you also grateful for things when they start to be taken away? Because that's really Jupiter retrograding in your 9th is like, okay, well, there's going to be all of this room for growth and opportunity, and it's going to be your challenge to recognize, because it's going to be easy to see the problems. We're human beings, and the challenge is going to be like, okay, how can you remain grateful? How can you remain, blessed? How can you, make sure your faith is, not necessarily restored, but consistent? And so this is kind of like, in my opinion, you're off on this new adventure. You're doing things in this new way, but it's going to require you to really, gain some faith. Really, I don't want to like get religious almost in a sense, like you have a faith practice of some sort. Then we get to September 16th, about a week and a half later, Mercury stations direct in Virgo. Again, this is in your first house, and this is where all of that starts to make sense. All of that starts to hit. You're like, all right, this is, I went over myself. I had to, clear up some things. I now see things in a better light. And so this seems really good as far as just like being clear on stuff. Mercury also rules your 10th house of career, so this can also indicate maybe a career shift. Maybe, Mars is in your second house of Libra. Venus is, retrograde in your 12th house. So this might have been like a struggle with jobs for a minute, and maybe at this point you actually get a job, or, your career opportunities shift a lot better at this point. Then we get to October. And again, this is where the Mars stuff really comes into play, because Mars is going to conjoin the South Node. It's in your second house of money, finances, possessions, food. Food rules the second house. Now, what I don't like about this is Mars in Libra is, again, there's this imbalance. There's this like Mars wants to be confrontational, and it can't do that in Libra. It's very passive. It's very indecisive. And this is your 8th house ruler of other people's money in your second house, in detriment in your money on the South Node. So this is like, maybe you get a little bit of money and you get this new job, and your first paycheck has to go to bills, has to go to debt. Or this could be someone stealing from you. I kind of doubt that one, but this is also like maybe, you have no choice but to pay this debt off, or to help somebody out. Maybe it's like you don't have a lot to give, but you have to give what you have. I think this is good. And Mars is on the South Node, right? This is like a separating, or like a draining or an exhausting thing when it comes to Libra, of like fairness, balance, peace, harmony, rules. The North Node's in Aries, where there's this sense of like, I feel like North Node in Aries in your 8th house is like debt collectors calling you, like, give me my money. And, Mars in the South Node in Libra is like, fuck, I don't want to do that, but here you go. So this is going to be a really big bummer. But this is also starting things off for the eclipse season that we're going to be going into at this point. Then after that, Mars enters Scorpio. Mars is going to be entering your 3rd house of communication, technology, short distance travel. What I like about this is Mars is finally entering its home sign, and now the South Node isn't there. So all of a sudden, your energy levels are going to increase. It's going to be going into your 3rd house of like day-to-day activities and time and how you utilize what you know. And this just seems like, and this is also in the middle of like eclipses, or at least an eclipse is about to begin here. And this just seems like a really big shift in your energy of like doing more. Maybe you had to pay a big bill and you're like, fuck, I'm not going to be broke anymore. I need to go and do this. I need to go and do that. The activation really kicks off here, or I should say the energy really activates at this point. This might cause fights and conflicts with siblings and stuff like that too. Same thing with, short distance travel. Maybe you're doing a lot of traveling at this point. But then 2 days later, we actually have our first solar eclipse in Libra. So we had a solar eclipse in Aries. We had a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. This is the first eclipse in Libra. And this is a solar eclipse. So this is like an ending, or a beginning, I should say, not a realization of things, or a climax of things. This is a starting point. And it's in your 2nd house of money and finances. Again, a lot of this stuff's coming up for you guys this year. And this is really where I think this is like the bottom. This is like rock bottom when it comes to money and finances. The other reason being is Venus at this point is now out of shadow. Now in your 1st house, she's fallen, and she's also going to be opposite Saturn. So money things are going to be really tight around this time, and you're probably going to have to do things that you don't want to do. This eclipse here in your 2nd house is like, again, I hate to say this, but a lot of this just doesn't look fair. And I think maybe even if it is, it's going to feel unfair to you, because that's the Libra stuff. South Node and Libra is like, this isn't fair. This isn't just. This isn't balance. And I'm not really sure what you can do about that. And I'm really curious about what situation you guys might be in. So let me know in the comments below by the time we get to October. But this just seems like I don't want to say a lose-lose, but just kind of like you got to just spend this money and you just suck it up and move on and hope for better days, essentially. So then we get to November. November, Saturn stations direct in Pisces, 7th house of relationships. I like this because at this point, Saturn's been retrograde. You've been taking on more discipline, responsibility, duty. You've been being more mature. And then when we get to November 4th, Saturn stations direct, where, like I said before, Saturn being direct the first time is like taking all of this opportunity, or taking all of these responsibilities and taking a position of authority. and it's like fun at first, but then you have to grow into those shoes. You have to do the work, you have to grow up, and at this point it's like you have done that maturation process. Is that the word? You've matured, you've grown up, and now you can take on this area of your life much more responsibly, much more maturely. And this is, again, 7th house of relationships. A lot of relationship stuff is coming up at this point. Now, after that, once we get to the 17th, just about a week later, we have our Mars Cazimi in Scorpio. Now, this is weird because this is going to be affecting everyone differently, but this is just in a weird house for you guys. I don't like talking about the 3rd house because it rules like a bunch of shit. Like, it's very all over the place, but specifically it rules communication, technology, short distance travel, siblings, neighbors, people around you. How do you utilize the knowledge that you have? And Mars rules your 3rd house. And it also rules your 8th house too. Now, the other thing I wanted to say actually before I talk about that is, at this point, when Mars is in Scorpio, it's going to be going opposite Jupiter and Uranus. So there's going to be a really big fluctuation of events that occurs in this area of like siblings, neighbors, and far distance travel, higher education. A lot of back and forth energy, both good, both bad. But then all of that, back and forth ping pong, whatever you want to call it, then gets us to November 17th, where Mars conjoins the sun, or I should say the sun conjoins Mars. This is resetting Mars' energy. And typically Mars' cycle around the sun is referred to as the hero's journey. And what I've been coining this, because I really like this idea, is like, this is like villain origin story stuff. Mars rules your 8th house of debt, other people's money, shared resources. It's in your 3rd house of short distance travel, siblings, neighbors. So somehow those two are going to be connected. But this is like resetting that energy. This is like clearing all that up. And this is kind of like, maybe debt gets cleared up. Venus is in Libra at this time in your 2nd house, so maybe money's a lot better. But this is like really restarting things and pretty much starting things over when it comes to the 3rd house of like siblings and stuff like that. It's a weird house. There's a lot going on there, so I'd be really curious as to how it specifically affects you guys. Then right after that, Mars enters Sagittarius and enters your 4th house of home and family and living situation. And the only reason this is interesting to me is because right after, like, we have this Mars Cazimi, and Mars enters Sagittarius. So Mars, again, fights conflicts in your 4th house of the home and family. It's in Sagittarius. So maybe, bringing up politics or, bringing up religion. Mars in Sagittarius might be like, wanting to leave home, wanting to be away from home. But Mars is going to be squaring Saturn. So there's something about this home life that is getting in the way of this relationship stuff at this point. And I think that's going to be the hard thing to pinpoint, right? So I would just really pay attention to problems coming from the home life that really get in the way of these relationships, or vice versa, relationships getting in the way of your home life. But then we move to December. We're already almost done here. And this is when we get Mercury retrograding in Capricorn. Again, this is in your 5th house, sex, passion, creativity, arts, children. So what's important about this is Mercury stations retrograde at the same degree that Mercury stationed direct on earlier in the year. So this is like a whole, 2 or 3 weeks later in the middle of December, and Mercury is going to literally station retrograde where it stationed direct earlier in the year. So think about whatever was going on in January and February, you're going to come back to around the middle of December. And this is going to be a rethinking, a re-strategizing, replanning, reorganizing around creativity, love, romance, sex, pleasure, children, fun in general, vices. So this is where a delay is going to occur. This is where you're going to be rethinking this whole area of your life. And then right after that, we get to the 30th, and this is just right before New Year's Eve. Jupiter stations direct in your 9th house, spirituality, religion. We've talked about it. When Jupiter stations direct, this is like faith is restored, order is restored in the universe. And this is really where, if you did the work over the few months of Jupiter retrograde of being like, remaining grateful, remaining positive, seeing the bigger picture, and also learning. Jupiter's about wisdom. So it's like, how do you again, this is 9th house, the 3rd house stuff of like really like doing the work that it takes to gain the wisdom that Jupiter is trying to offer. And so once Jupiter stations direct in your 9th house, again, spirituality, astrology, higher education, far distance travel, there's going to be the sense of opportunity again. There's going to be the sense of expansion again. But that kind of just sounds like that's what's leading you into the new year. So that's 2023 for the Virgo risings. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be posting videos about Saturn and Pisces, Jupiter and Taurus, Jupiter and Aries, and all of that stuff. So again, thank you guys so much for being here, watching, liking, sharing, subscribing, and I'll be seeing you next time.